Hi guys, welcome to the NASA Strat. Today we'll be learning how to make a halter neck double-breasted blazers with box pleats. If this is something you're interested in, you want to keep watching. If you're yet to subscribe to the channel, please subscribe and let's get started. So from the top, come down 6 inches from the top of your paper and make a line across. After that, from the center of your paper, go in by 7 inches and also make your line across that point. So the top part will serve for the collar, while this one we're marking now is going to serve as the overlap allowance for the blazer. So you're just going to mark this so that you can work with this perfectly. So after doing that, we have our lines. Now the next thing I'll do is to go there and then mark half of the shoulder measurement I'm working with, and then the neck width of 3 inches. I'll go to the shoulder point, come down 1 inch, and just connect it to the neck width to get my shoulder slope. So after that, go ahead and place your other vertical measurement, your shoulder to the bust point, your shoulder to the underbust, shoulder to the waist, shoulder to the hip, and then the length, depending on how long you want yours to appear. So from the intro video, you notice that this gown has pleats attached to the ends of it, that's to the hem of the upper part, you have pleats attached to it, okay, which creates a difference. Now from this line, I went up 2 inches so that I can get my armhole depth line. And I'm going to ensure that the line I'm going to make here matches with what I have around the shoulder areas. And I'll make a horizontal and a vertical line at that point. So I'm going ahead to label the chest points, the bust points, the underbust, and the waist. Now I'll go ahead and mark my hip, which will also be same as the length. So for you to get this, you want to consider the length of the gown you're working with, depending on where you want your gown to end. So for this gown, we're making a gown of 36 inches. So the upper part, I marked 27 inches. 1 inch extra is going to be my joining allowance, okay, and any excesses which I need to trim off. So I marked 26 inches at the upper part, okay. Now around armhole, get the midpoint of your armhole depth line, and then you come in by half of an inch, then go ahead and mark quarter of your round bust measurement around the chest line. Okay, then the next thing we're going to do is to just create our armhole curve at that point. So now that we have it down, we're going to place the neck depth. So for the back, we'll be using a neck depth of 1.5, and then for the front, a neck depth of 3 inches. Okay, I'm just going to connect my neck to the width. So for the back, 1.5, and then for the front, I'm using 3.5 inches. I actually marked 3 inches initially, and then I marked 3.5 inches. So next, we're going to mark our bust span line. So the bust span is the distance from one nipple to the other. Whatever measurement you get, go ahead and divide by 2, and then place your answer from the bust point to your full length. You can see me just marking that down, after which I'll go in with my rule to connect. So for this, I'm using 3.5 inches. I'm going to connect those 3 points together. Now from the bust point, I'll come down by 1 inch and make a mark. And at the waist, I'm going to go in on both sides of the line I have here. I'll go in 0.75 inches, which totals 1.5, okay? So we're going to just mark that here, 0.75 inches on both sides. Now note that you can also use half of an inch. So this is a blazer. We're not doing too much on it, not too much that intake, okay? So you go over to the full length and you do the same 0.75 inches on both sides of the line, and you connect it to the waist area. Now we have that down. So the next thing we want to do is to mark our horizontal measurement, okay? So we have that of the chest. The next thing you want to do is to add your seam allowance to this end. So we'll be using a seam allowance of 1.5. Now I'm using 1.5, and later on I'll go ahead and adjust this. So around the waist, go ahead and place quarter of your round waist measurement, the dart intake of 1.5 inches, and then the seam allowance of 1.5 inches. Now at the hip point, that's the full length line, go ahead and take quarter of your round hip, the dart intake of 1.5 inches, and also the seam allowance of 1.5, and you're going to connect those points together. Now this is what we have here right now. So we're going to now come over to the center front. So for your overlap allowance, you're going to determine how much overlap you want in front, how overlapped you want the front to be. So for the case of this tutorial, we'll be making use of 5 inches. So from this point, which is the waist point, now I want my break point to be the waist. Your break point can stop around your bust area or the waist area, depending on where you want it to end, okay? So I'm using the waist as my break point for this dress, and then I marked 5 inches from my line I had there, which this now serves as the overlap allowance so that it overlaps to the other side. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, so you're going to determine how overlapped you want your piece to be. So this is the overlap allowance right here, and that is where we're going to have the break of our collar. It means that the collar will come to that point, the lapel will come to that point and have a break. That's where it's going to have like a fold for the ironing. Now we're going to connect a slanted line from the neck width to that point where we just finished marking. So you just go ahead and connect it like so, right? So this is what we're going to have. That is the break for our lapel, right? Now the next thing we're going to do is to come over to the neckline here. This is the front neckline. You come out 2.5 inches from that point, and we're going to rule a line across it. Now we're going to connect also to the waist. So this is the lapel. What we just drafted now is the lapel. Okay, what we just drafted now is the lapel. I'm just changing my markers because the first one was faint. So this is the lapel. This is the part that's going to fall over. I'm just trying to highlight my lines so that you see it very clearly. Now we're going to move over to the back neckline. You can see me writing B, which indicates the back. So we're going to measure that. We know that we don't have anything at the back, but the collar falls towards the back. So we want to include this in the drafting of the collar. Go ahead and measure yours, whatever you get. Make sure that you measure that very well so that you get the accurate measurement. You need this to really match. So whatever you get, you're going to come over to this place and then you extend it outwards like so, and rule a line also to that point where you extended it from. So that line there, at the top of that line, I will go out by 1/2 inch and I'll connect it back to my neck width. So you want to ensure that the exact measurement you got from measuring your neck width of the back is the same thing you're using to place this extension, please, so that you don't have excess by the time you cut out your fabric. Now you want to determine the width of your collar. I would advise you for a halter neck collar, you should use about 4 inches, okay? So that when you make a fold, it's going to close very well and look nice. I use 3.5 inches, but I would advise you to use 4 inches. So now that we're going to come over here and we'll come in and get the midpoint of this measurement we have here. Remember, we marked 2.5. So half of 2.5 is going to give us 1.25 inches. So from the edge, I went up by 1/2 inch, and I'm trying to ensure that what I had there also, the distance from the end to the part I made my first mark is 1.5 inches. You need to ensure that they are matching perfectly. If they are not, you just simply need to go in to adjust that. So now that I have that, I'm going to make a slanted line from that 1/2 inch point I came up towards the 1.25 inches I marked at the middle, and then I'll go in with my curve rule to connect. So now we've gone ahead to draft out the collar piece for our blazers. So the next thing we want to do now is to get the halter neck. So for the halter neck, we're going to be drawing a line, a curved line, coming from the armhole towards the neck width. See how my curve is placed? That is simply what you need to do. So we're going to place a curve. Make sure you are placing a very nice curve coming towards that way. And you can dip in your curve depending on how deep you want it to be. Now, what I'll do is to come over here to the shoulder area, get the midpoint, and then extend a line from that point to meet the line I have at the bust area. So we want to tighten this armhole area, which is where we have that the sleeveless area. So we want to tighten that area with a dart. We're going to have like a little intake at that point, so that when we stitch together, that point will not be gaping, right? So what we're going to do is that on both sides of this piece, I will come in 1/2 inch on both sides of the line that cuts across the curve I drew for my armhole curve, okay? So I'm going to extend the chest line I have here because this line, the half-inch intake from that armhole area um, is going to get to the chest line. Okay, I hope you understand what I'm saying. So we're just going to connect the line. Just use the curved part of it, just a slight curve, and then you connect that to that point. So after connecting that properly, you'll notice that one is actually longer than the other. Now, for us to not have any issues while we're attaching both pieces together, what you have to do is to measure. So you measure one and then measure the other. So whichever one is longer than the other, you just have to make adjustments so that the both of them fit. And while you're stitching together, everything aligns. So you see that I extended the line from the longer one, which is the one on the inside. I extended that out and then extended the outer one, which is short. Now I'm going to now create another armhole curve for my piece. Okay, so this is for us to avoid shortage while we're stitching together. So I'm going ahead to label, this is the collar. You want to indicate the part of the collar that you're attaching to the neckline. This is the lapel, this is the center front and the center back. So now that we have our pattern down, the next thing we'll do is to go on and cut it out. So you want to watch closely how I'm cutting so that you understand everything. You can get this perfectly well. So for the back, I've gone ahead to rule a starting line. Now you want to place the measurement from your chest line outward. See, I placed 8 inches outward and I'm marking my bust point. I'm marking the waist and then I'm going to mark the full length. Make sure that it matches with the length you had in front, okay? So you're going to place your chest line outward. Please make sure it's your chest line you're placing outwards. I used 8 inches because it was 8 inches I used for the front, okay? 8 inches I used for the front. So now I just went ahead to mark those points and ruled them out. So the back of this blazers is backless. We know that already because it's a halter neck. So we don't have that part that's from the starting the shoulder area down to the chest line is out. So I'm going ahead to mark our bust span. Remember, I told you how to get that. Divide your, take the measurement from one nipple to the other, the distance from one nipple to the other, and divide by 2. And you're going to place that down. Mark that from your chest line, in this case, down to the full length. Now we're going to take the same dart intake around the waist area, which is 0.75 inches. And then we're going to connect to the top, which is the chest point. So just go ahead and connect it to the top. And then you go over to the full length, you come down 4 inches from the waist. Unlike what we did in front, you'll notice a little difference in this. So we came down 4 inches from the waist, and then we're going ahead to place our horizontal measurement. So you're going to place quarter of your round bust, your seam allowance of 1.5 inches. You come over to the waist, you place quarter of your round waist measurement, your dart intake, and then the seam allowance of 1.5 inches. Then you go over to the hip and you're going to place quarter of your round hip measurement and then the seam allowance of 1.5 inches. And you go in with your rule to connect the points which you created together. So this is what we have for this piece. Now we want to come over to the waist. We're coming in 1/2 inch at the waist. So this will help to snatch the back. We don't want the fabric to be folding around that point. And you're going to connect it to nothing at the top and then nothing at the base. Just 1/2 inch is okay. Now for the tightening of the upper part for the back, we're going to be tightening this also. You don't want after wearing your piece and then you have it, gaping. But before that, we're going to move to creating the curve around the neckline. So the neckline isn't straight. If you want to leave yours straight, just the way we have it on pattern here, you can leave that. But I came up 1 inch from the bust point line, which I have at the center back, and I used my curve rule to just create a curve from the side to that point. In fact, I was considering how deep I wanted the center back neckline to be. Okay, I considered that a lot, but I left it this way. It was fine. So now around this line here that cuts across this part, what I'm going to do is to take 1/2 inch on both sides of my dart. Again, I'm taking 1/2 inch on that part and I'm going to connect it down. So ignore this first connection I'm making, connecting it to the waist. That's not where you should connect it to, please. That was a total mistake. You should be connecting it to blend into the line you have. I'm going to make that correction here so you understand what I'm trying to explain. You're not supposed to connect it this way, which I connected it. No. So we're going to just adjust this so that you understand. You see how you're meant to do the connection. So after doing that, after doing this first connection, I looked at it and it looked quite funny to me. So I'm going to, adjust this. So now this is how you're going to connect this part. So I'm using a blue marker so that you see the difference with what I connected before. So you connect this to blend into the line. That's the original dot line you have coming from the top. Okay, that's how you should connect it and not what we did before. So we made that adjustment. Now we go in with our scissors to cut it out. So when you finish, you want to align the side piece of both. Make sure that they are matching, the lengths are matching. You can see that even my waist lines, they are matching. This is what you should have, okay? Now I'm going ahead to cut on my fabric. On the center front of this piece, I actually cut out 4 pieces, okay? Remember we have the lapel. When you flip it over, iron it down, you need the main piece of your fabric to be showing. So you're going to cut 4 pieces of your main piece of fabric on for your front, that's the center front piece. Okay, I hope you understand that. Now we're going to indicate the part where we'll be attaching this collar to the neckline and where we'll not be attaching. So I'm going to mark where the notch meets, the notched area where they're going to meet, and also where the front neckline ends. See, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm using my marker to do that because my chalk wasn't showing and I want you to see what I'm doing. So we're going to just mark it there, make sure that they are meeting, and then you make that mark. So on all my patterns, I added half of an inch around the neckline. I added half of an inch around the side where my dart will sit. The center front, I added half of an inch. The only parts I didn't add any seam allowance was at the bottom and then also at the side seam allowance because I already did that. On the other parts, I did. So on this point where you just made your marks, you want to make a cut there. So I made a cut at that point. I'm also going to make that cut also on my collar piece so that it matches. Now I've gone ahead to iron my interfacing on my piece. This is the main piece of fabric that we use. I actually used a total of 3 yards of fabric for this project. So we're going to start stitching down. You want to place right side to right side of your piece, bringing them together, the side piece to the center front, and you stitch them together. So I'm going to use my pins to hold them down first before going about to the machine to stitch. And you want to start your stitching from the bottom. So you stitch from bottom to the top. Then we're going to bring in the lining piece of the front. Now, this piece here is the main piece of fabric. It's also my main piece of fabric, but it's going to serve as my lining. So I'll be attaching it to the lining of the side piece of the front. I hope you understand what I'm saying. You're going to place them right side to right side. Use your pins to hold them down and go ahead and stitch. Now, for the back piece, I actually have 3 of this. So you're going to have 4 pieces for the back. You're going to place them right side to right side. I made a notch on the part that I'm stitching together. This is how it's going to sit. So you're going to pin everything together, head over to your machine and stitch them down, starting from the base, that's the bottom. You're going to stitch ½ inch from that point towards the top area of your piece of fabric. So make sure that you're placing them the way they should go. Especially for the back, please make sure to notch the upper part of the back. Notch the parts where you're going to be attaching together, where they are aligned together. It's important for you to make those notches and follow through with stitching them because the back seems kind of plain and you can get confused if you don't know how to place them properly to stitch. So after doing for your main piece of fabric, repeat for the lining. So whatever we're doing to the lining, the main piece will repeat for the fabric also. So this is the back after stitching. I ironed open my seam. I did the same thing to the lining. Now we're going to place them lining to fabric right side to right side. You're going to pin. Where we want to stitch is just the neckline of the back. So we're going to stitch along the neckline, stitch it by ½ of an inch, and that is it for the back for now. Okay, just leave the sides and the bottom open. Just stitch along the neckline by ½ of an inch. So this is the front after I finish stitching together. These are my lining pieces for the front, and these are the main piece of fabrics for the front. So after stitching, you want to iron open your seam, iron in front. You can see the watermarks on mine. So please make sure that you do yours properly. Iron them very well. It's important for your seams to stay open after you finish stitching them. Okay, so what we want to do now is to align these parts together. So we're aligning the lining to the main piece of fabric together. Okay, the idea is to stitch down the center of our piece. So we're going to be stitching half of an inch, which is the extra seam allowance we added while we were cutting this out. So you're going to just stitch that half of an inch down. After that, we're going to bring in the collar. So remember, we already made marks on our collar. This is going to be a guide on how we can stitch this down properly. So you're going to place your collar right side to right side. Make sure the parts where you have your marks, your notches, that they are matching perfectly. So we're going to place this down, and then I'll be showing you how we will be stitching. What we're going to do is to stitch this. Now you're going to stitch from one notch part to one. You're going to stitch close the center back. See where I'm pointing? Stitch that close. You stitch here close. You're also going to stitch the base close. So we're going to stitch from here to here closed. Okay. Then after that, we're going to skip the next part to the stitch and then stitch the other end closed. So you're going to stitch it this way closed. Okay. So I finished for the back. This is what it looks like. I also went ahead to top stitch towards my lining piece, so that makes it very relaxed. Okay, and I went ahead to really press this down. Okay, now we're going to bring in the front piece. This is it after stitching the center part. I've not ironed this yet. Okay, we're going to be doing this ironing after attaching the collar to it. So this is the collar. This is the part where you're going to have open. This open part will be attached to the neckline of our front piece. So I'll be taking you over to the machine, and then we're going to stitch it down. So you want to sandwich your collar. That's the open part of the collar, which is the front part of your collar. You're going to sandwich it in between your main piece of fabric and then your lining piece. Okay, but you're going to ensure to indicate that point. Remember, we made a mark initially where our notch starts from. So you're going to make sure you close down that point to the part where your notch starts from, to the point where your collar will sit from, and then you start stitching. So the collar is curved, the edge of the collar is curved. You want to be patient and careful while you're stitching it down. So you're going to be turning the collar as you stitch a little, you twist your collar so that it fits into that space. You twist, you sew like that. So you're going to be adjusting as you sew. This part takes a lot of patience. Okay, you don't want to just stitch and then you're putting all the allowances of your collar inside. That's not what we're trying to do. So you just need only half of an inch of your collar opening to stitch it down. So you're going to make sure that you're patient and stitch this gradually. Take your time and stitch it perfectly that it works. So after stitching the neckline area, stitching your collar to the neckline area, the next part we're going to stitch is the armhole. Okay, so I've done this for one part of my piece. I'm just showing you how to do this for the other part, for those of you that might be confused. So this is what it looks like. I just done that. Okay, that looks nice. It looks clean after I finish doing that. Now what I'm going to do is to flip it back to the wrong side and then stitch the armhole area. You want to align them together and you stitch. Make sure that your collar is tucked inside perfectly. Do not stitch on top of your collar, okay? So that you don't end up losing and restitching. So make sure that your collar is tucked inside perfectly, and then you place your armhole area perfectly, lining to main piece of fabric, and you stitch everything down. So this part also requires you to be very patient and very careful. So take your time and stitch them down perfectly by half of an inch. So after stitching down, I'm going to take off the excess fabric I have around here because I actually had a lot of excess fabric. I'm going to take that off, and then you want to notch. So it's important for you to notch. Notching is going to help these areas to relax by the time you press them down. So you want to notch. You're going to repeat the same thing on the other side. In my case, I've done that. So for you, go ahead and repeat on the other side so that it comes out looking nice. So this is what it looks like after turned it to the right side and giving it a very good press. You want to iron this very, very well. So next we're going to be stitching the sides together. So we're stitching the sides lining to lining, fabric to fabric. Our seam allowance in this case is 1.5. So you're going to place them this way and then stitch 1.5, lining to lining, fabric to fabric. So this is what it looks like after I finished. You can see that this is looking so beautiful already. This is what it looks like. Okay. So we want to work on the box pleat area. Now for this, you want to measure what you have around the base. You're going to take your measurement from one end to the other end. Now this is another part that requires you to be very careful while you're doing this. So you measure carefully from one end to the other end. Now whatever you have, multiply it by 3 inches. Multiply it by 3, not 8 inches. Whatever you have, multiply by 3, okay? And then another thing is that you want to determine, like, remember we determined the length earlier on. So the upper part is 27 plus the stitching allowance extra. But right now, I even have it less than 27 inches. This was 26 inches. And then for the piece that I cut out for the pleats, I cut out 11 inches, I hemmed it. So now I have it about 10 inches, okay? The difference of length wasn't much, but you should make sure that your length matches with the exact length you want, okay? So now the idea now is to attach the pleated part to the upper part, but we're going to create pleats on this before we go ahead to do that. So make sure to hem the base and then you hem the sides of the piece of fabric that you are going to use for this pleat, for your box pleat. So I'll be explaining to you how to achieve that. You can see that I've gone ahead to create some pleats on this. I'm going to show you how I achieve this. I do not want to spend a lot of time doing that so that this video will not be too long. So the first thing, the most important thing you're going to do is to measure 1 inch in 3 places. That's 3 inches, 1 inches. You measure that at the top, you measure that at the base. Now you're going to fold the first 1 inch, fold it to lap at the third 1 inch. Okay, you understand that? So you're going to fold from the first 1 inch and ensure that that 1 inch ends at the third one. Now you repeat this process, measuring 1 inch in 3 places, and you continue. Now, if you want your pleats to be bigger, you're going to use maybe 1.5 inches or 2 inches, depending on how big or how bold you want your pleats to appear. So in this case, we are using 1 inch. So you're going to measure 1 inch in 3 places, and then you fold from the first 1 inch to the third. Repeat the same process. Measure, mark out 1 inch in 3 places. Fold from the first one to the third one, and you pin down. So you're going to pin down at the top, at the base, at the middle, depending on the quantity of your pins. Okay, you just keep doing that. At a point, the pins I had available got finished, and I had to take off the ones at the middle. So the most important places you have to pin is at the top and also at the base. You continue this process as you go. You fold, you measure, you fold, you pin, you fold. Sorry, you measure, you fold, you pin. So you measure first, you pin, and then okay, so you measure first, you fold, and then you pin. Okay, so that's just it. And while you're doing this, you're going to be taking the measurement of the length you have, the fold you have, if it fits into what you measured from your upper piece. So you're going to do this process bit by bit and then measure, measure, measure. It takes a lot of time. The reason why I didn't want to, dwell on this while doing that. So after doing this, you go ahead and give it a really good press. Just iron this down. Make sure you have a fabric in between your iron and your piece of fabric. Go ahead and your piece of fabric which you use for the pleats. Okay, I hope you understand that. So you're going to iron this gently. Take your time, iron this. Make sure you're applying enough heat to it so that that pleat stays put. You're going to do this, iron this, adjust, iron this, adjust. Do the same thing down to the end of the length of the pleats you have here. So you're going to do this gradually till you achieve your desired results. So after doing that, this is what it looks like. Now we're going to be stitching from the top. We'll come down 4 inches from the top and we're going to stitch. So you're going to stitch on the part where you pleated, where you have that fold. You repeat that to the end. So you can either do that kind of pleats, this kind of stitching, or you just stitch them at the top. But I think this one helps is to stay put. And then the next thing we're going to do is to attach to the upper piece. The pleat is ready. Now is to attach. We're going to make a notch at on the main piece of fabric. That's the upper part where you're pinning this to. You're going to make a notch at that point. And please, when you're notching your pleated point, make sure you notch the front of the pleat. I actually notched the back and I got confused. I was not looking for my notched. I couldn't see it. So make sure you're notching the front part of the pleat, not the wrong side. When you notch the front part, you can easily identify it so that it's not lost in between the folds you have at the back. So now that we've determined that, what I'm going to do is to place that notched part to the center back of my back, center back, yes, and then I'm going to just stitch it. Make sure you pin first and then go ahead to stitch it to wrap up this gown. So this is what it looks like. So on the inside, you just want to serge it so that it looks very beautiful. Now this is the final result of everything we've been doing. This is what it looks like. So to put this on, you want to now bring out your pleats properly and give it a very good press. Okay, that's why the stitching helps you to identify where each pleat falls to so that you can iron that properly for them to fit. So the last thing for this is to fix buttonholes and then fix buttons. So by the time you overlap this, so the client has to wear this, or whoever you're making it for yourself to, you have to put this on your body to know where you want that overlap buttons and buttonholes to sit. So you have to put this on your body and then measure that properly so that it fits. By the time you wear it, it's going to give you a very defined fitting, and ensure to iron properly before you wear. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Give this video a thumbs up and let me know of your thoughts in the comment section. See you next time. Bye.